Hello everyone, welcome to Monday Mailbag on Blazers Uprise. I'm Eric Brandt. If you have any questions for future episodes, please leave them in the comments below. That is, except for trade ideas. Those leave in whatever the latest Trade Talk Tuesday video is. And there was a lot of great questions and comments this week, so let's get right into them. Damian McCollum had a four-parter. I kind of liked all four of these questions, so I'll get to all four of them in the future if you would try to limit it to one question per week so we can try and get to everybody. But his first question is, do you think Zach will start if healthy? My answer to that is yes. I think Zach is the long-term starting power forward. Now, obviously, if we made a trade and acquired a star 4, he would start over Zach, but this year we were 9-3 in games Zach started. He didn't really get a chance to prove himself, and when he came back in the bubble, he was coming off an injury, didn't have a lot of time to prepare for it and all that. He didn't get cleared till mid-June to even play contact basketball. So I think they're going to give him the opportunity to see what he has and what improvements he can make. Now, those improvements are going to be limited because he was injured and is again injured during another offseason. So you don't know how much he can develop his game, but I do think he should be the starter, and we should see what that looks like with him and Nurk, and then adding Ariza back into the mix if we keep him. I think they deserve a chance to see what they can do potentially as a unit. His second question is, do you think Nasir should be in the rotation? Now, this is a tough one for me. I really believe in Nas's ability, and I think he's going to be a great player in the future. The problem is we should be 9 deep if Olshey plays everything right this offseason. So a guy like Ariza still has 1 year left on his deal. He is a little older, but I think this season he would get a majority of the minutes at the small forward, and you don't know what other players will be bringing in at the time. But if Hood's healthy, he would obviously get playing time at the 3 as well. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for Little. But I think if he plays well enough, if Hood still struggles coming back from that injury, and he plays so well that Stotts has no choice but to leave him in the rotation, I think that is a possibility. I don't know how likely that is. My guess is this year will be another developmental year for Little. And then in the future, 1 year later, when Ariza's contract is up, we probably look for more of a role, not this season, but the season after that for Little. I'm hoping I'm wrong and he shows a huge jump in his second year like Trent did this year, but typically for Blazers they don't really see a lot of consistent playing time under Stotts until their third season, unless you're a star like Damian Lillard. His third question is, do you think Mario still has the potential to be a rotational piece / backup player for this team? No, he does not have a chance. If he's a rotational piece next year, we are going to be struggling. I'm not trying to disrespect Mario, but he should be an into the bench type guy if he's in the NBA, not a rotational player on a team that's trying to contend. That's just silly. So no, I don't think he's going to be a rotational piece. And his fourth and final question is, if you were Olshey, would you look to trade the 16th pick or draft a prospect? I really love some of the players around where we're going to be picking at 16. Guys like Saddiq Bey and Aaron Naismith are really high on my draft board. So I would try to keep the pick and draft one of those guys. That's the only way they can really get a star, is if they happen to get lucky and hit a home run on a draft pick. Obviously, it's unlikely that the 16th pick would be a home run, especially in this draft that's considered not to be star heavy, but you never know in drafts. There's always a player picked outside of the lottery that ends up being really good, but I think there are some guys that have some ability to pop and some huge potential, so I would not trade this pick. Our next question comes from Zacho Colapano. He asks, what players do you think have sneaky upside in this draft outside of the lottery? If Naismith or Bey aren't available at 16, should they take a guy like Poku? I absolutely think they should if those two guys are not on the board. If Naismith or Bey are on the board at 16 and we don't take one of those, I'm going to be really mad, because I really think those two players are going to be great wings in this league. But yeah, if those guys are off the board, I would definitely take a flyer on a guy like Poku, just kind of develop him in the shadows until he's ready. I also think a guy like Teo Maledon is being severely underrated in this draft. I think he is just as good as Killian Hayes. I know that's kind of a bold statement, but I think it's crazy to me that Maledon is falling so much like towards the latter end of some mock drafts in the first round, while Hayes is still a top 10 pick. I think they're a lot closer than that gap shows. The problem is the Blazers obviously don't need like a developmental point guard since they still have Simons, but I think if we're just talking what players do I think have sneaky upside, Maledon and Poku would be my two choices. Bringing Chili asked, what's the deal with Pau? Was he supposed to stay with the team and be a player coach or something? So Pau Gasol was signed to a contract obviously last offseason by the Blazers, but they smartly wrote into the contract that if he was not healthy by a certain date that we could waive him, and the contract became not guaranteed. So that kind of helped us financially that we didn't have to pay him. But yeah, it was kind of a bad decision to sign him considering that he was not healthy enough to play. He went back to Spain, and when he was released, he never came back. He was supposed to be our coach eventually. I don't know if that's still an option. Everything I'm hearing is that he still wants to play in the league, so he just continued his rehab, and I think he's going to try and play next season again. I don't know if any team will sign him or if his foot will be healthy enough for him to play, but that was the plan for him to try and play again next season. I'm kind of disappointed. I would have liked to have seen what he could do as a big man coach. I think he would be really knowledgeable and help our young bigs out a lot, but unfortunately that didn't happen, and I don't think it was anything like Pau didn't like being here or anything. It just didn't work out for him to be a coach at this time. Brian Scalabrini asks, what should we expect from the Mavericks this year, or what will they try to do in the offseason? Tim Hardaway Jr. has a player option for a little over $20 million. I'm expecting him to opt into that. We don't know what's going to happen with the cap yet. The cap situation is all tied to revenue from the year before, so the fact that we had the Corona and the China stuff happened earlier in the season, we don't know how that will impact the cap moving forward. My guess is it'll probably be about the same as it was this year, so they wouldn't have a lot of cap to use on signing anyone, but they also don't have a lot of future assets. They owe a 2021 first and a 2024 or something to the New York Knicks in the Porzingis trade, so they don't have a lot of picks they can trade in the future due to the Stepien rule where you can't trade picks in consecutive years. So I think they'll try to move a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. and maybe some other guys for a more proven wing, but I just don't know who they can get with that without being able to attach young players or assets to it. Maybe a guy like Otto Porter Jr. from Chicago might make sense for them to try and get, but overall, I think they're just going to try to continue to build around Doncic and Porzingis, mostly just keep the same team they had this year, try to add a mid-level exception type guy, but overall I don't know how much flexibility they have, so I don't think they're going to be too different next year from this year. Nike Hunter brings up Mario again. He says, what's your opinion on Mario? I think we should get rid of him. I don't think he is going to be part of the rotation moving forward. We're in trouble if we do, like I said earlier, but getting rid of him is tough. I guess I wouldn't be opposed to just trading him with like a second round pick, say the number 46 pick this year or a future second, just to get rid of him. I usually don't like doing that, and the fact that he makes less than $2 million to give up any kind of asset to have to dump his contract when there's only 1 year left, I don't really like doing. It would be great if we needed that $1.9 million as filler in a bigger trade, and then we could just dump him as part of it and be like, oh hey, we need this money to make the trade work, but I don't think we're going to get that lucky. He could also opt out and go back overseas and play. I don't think we're going to get lucky with that either, so we're kind of stuck with Mario for 1 more year if he opts in. I hope I'm wrong and he doesn't opt in, but yeah, I think he's going to be on the end of our bench next year. Khalil Thomas asks, what are your thoughts on signing Kylo Quinn as a backup big? He is a pretty underrated passer and would let us run similar sets to what we do with Nurkic with the bench. Kylo Quinn's a guy, if you would have asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have been all for bringing in. I think he is a quality backup center. However, his last 2 stops, both Indiana and Philly, he hasn't really played well. He hasn't really gotten many minutes on either of those teams. So I think at this point, I'd rather just take a flyer on some younger centers and see if we can develop them versus taking a guy who we know is kind of limited on what he can do. You are right, he does have some skills that can fit in with our offense, but if he didn't fit in with those last 2 teams, I don't think he can help our team really take the next step or anything like that. As I just mentioned, we will have some roster spot issues as well. I guess I wouldn't mind having him as like a third center or whatever, but overall I don't think we should go for guys like this with the contract situations we have. Russell, first round exit Westbrook, asks, is Jamal Murray a top 5 point guard? We obviously saw Jamal Murray play incredibly well in their playoff run to the Western Conference Finals this year. However, during the regular season, this is a guy who averaged 18.5 points and 4.8 assists. Nothing special. I know they run a lot of their offense through Jokic, but he just hasn't proven it for long enough to me to put him in the top 5 quite yet. I think he is right on the verge of being in the conversation for the top 5. I just can't put Jamal Murray in there yet. I think he is in the tier of guys fighting for that probably 5th best point guard in the league. And if he plays in the regular season next year and moving forward like he did in the playoffs this year, he's going to jump those rankings really quick, possibly up to like 3rd or 4th. But right now, he's right on the edge. I'd say maybe just outside the top 5. Liquid Ping asked, chances of getting Giannis this offseason. I'd put that as a 0.001% chance of getting Giannis. I just don't see the Bucks trading him. It seems like he wants to stay and make it work in Milwaukee. I don't think he's going to be available to trade for, but even if he did, I think we can offer a pretty good package. I'm not sure if it's enough to beat other teams that could possibly offer more, but yeah, I just don't see Giannis being traded this offseason, so I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. Our next question comes from Connor McIntosh, who asks, where does Fred VanVleet end up this offseason? My guess is the Knicks or potentially even Clippers if Toronto value Harrell, sign and trade type of deal. I don't see a sign and trade with the Clippers happening. The Knicks are definitely a possible suitor for VanVleet. My guess is that he'll stay in Toronto though. I think they're going to try to move forward after this next season with more of a core, focusing on VanVleet, OG, and Siakam. So those 3 will be the next 3 that take them after Lowry, Gasol, and Ibaka move on. Now, Lowry still has 1 more year left on his deal, so I think they'll try to make it work with both of them playing. It's worked out pretty well for them the past couple of years. I think they'll either try to get Lowry on a reduced rate going forward after next season, or move on from him as well and let VanVleet take over as the regular starting point guard. And then guys like Gasol and Ibaka, I think they're going to try to re-sign as well. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to keep both of those guys. If I had to guess, I would say that Toronto would look very similar to what they did this season. Our next question is from the Brennanator. He asked, I feel like we need a little more toughness on our team. With Whiteside probably gone, we need also a good rebounder and some energy off our bench. Do you think someone like Kenneth Faried is worth it, or even bring back Ed Davis? Ed Davis I'll get to first. He's under contract for a little over $5 million next year, so he would fit into our trade exception, and I think Utah would just give him to us for basically nothing if we really wanted him. However, he was really bad last year on Utah, barely could get any minutes. I know he had some injury problems as well. Much like we talked about with Kylo Quinn earlier, I just don't see Ed Davis as being a difference maker. I think we could get a better backup center going elsewhere. I know he'd be a good teammate and he's well liked by the guys on our team. Toughness is important, but I just don't see much of a role for Ed Davis on the roster. Kenneth Faried played in China last year, and then there was some weird, like, did he get injured or did he just get let out of his contract? It's kind of unknown. And then when he came back home, he didn't sign with a team. So that kind of scares me a little bit. I think moving forward, it's probably someone who might not ever play in the NBA again. I wouldn't be opposed to looking into it and seeing if we can get him on a minimum contract. But again, I don't think he's really going to make a difference on this team moving forward either. So I'd probably pass on Faried and Ed Davis. Not a bad idea, but yeah, I don't really think either of them would be huge parts of our rotation. Our next question comes from Thomas Oransky, who asks, who would be an underrated cheap signing or trade that could pop for us defensively? I do think we have a guy on our roster that could be that already, and that's Nasir Little. And then we also could re-sign Wenyen Gabriel, who I think would also fit as an answer to this question. But if you're talking about players who aren't currently on our team, I would make a phone call to guys like Serge Ibaka, Derek Favors, Paul Millsap, just see if there's any interest in signing for the mid-level exception. I think those guys would all be great defensively. This might sound kind of weird, but the way you asked the question, a guy like Tristan Thompson would actually be a perfect backup center in our system. He plays the pick and roll really well, can switch on to guards and keep them in front of him. He's a decent rebounder, not the greatest offensively, but I think a guy like that would fit well if you're just talking about who could pop defensively on our roster and allow us to keep running similar defensive schemes without getting completely torched like we have been. I had a dream too that the Lakers needed cap space. They offered us Avery Bradley using our trade exception. He might be a good defensive bench guard for us. I don't know how much playing time he would get, but that wouldn't be a terrible player. There's a handful of guys that are restricted free agents that I think would be good fits. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the means to get those players, but if you could get Chris Dunn to be a backup defensive guard, if you could get a Javon Carter for that same role, I would definitely look into those two guys. And then also, if Atlanta doesn't bring Scal back, I wouldn't mind a reunion with him, bring him back on a reasonable salary. I thought he still has a lot of potential both defensively and offensively. So if you're talking about a guy who could really pop and find a next level, he would be one of those guys who still has some hidden potential there. Definitive one is in with a couple of questions. The first one is, how do you guys feel about making CJ a sixth man? I'm just going to stop it right there. I think that's a terrible idea. Dame and CJ usually play about 36 minutes a game. That only leaves 12 minutes where Dame is not on the court, where we'd have a bench scoring guard needed. And CJ already plays those 12 minutes. We already rotate them so they don't play together. So it makes no sense to put him to the bench when he already plays with the bench unit. And all that does is make our second or maybe third best player mad. Our starting of games is usually not the problem. We're usually fine at the beginning of games. It's more when the bench starts coming in. We do need to improve the bench, but I don't think this is the way to do it. But I'll continue to put this point home. Our problem is not with the backcourt. It's not with the size. It's not with who plays in what position. It's how we use those players in our scheme. Now, I think Dame and CJ still can be a decent defensive unit if they're playing with three other players that are good defensively. But overall, unless our scheme changes or make our defense less predictable, it does not matter if we start CJ or make him the sixth man. We're going to see all the same problems. His second question is, was Mason Plumlee leaving AD to cover LeBron inexcusable, or can you see any reason the fans are missing on why he may have done it? In our opinions, Tori and I actually broke this down on a recent stream. We both feel like it was not Mason Plumlee's fault at all. You can clearly see him pointing and yelling at Grant to switch, and Grant just stands there. Now, I know LeBron attracts a lot of attention and he didn't want him to cut to the basket, but Plumlee makes it there in plenty of time. Grant had time to get out on AD, doesn't even move. Before the play, you see a video where Grant tells Plumlee to help him with LeBron. Now, if Plumlee is guarding AD, that's not the guy you want to tell to help with LeBron. So Grant messed it up, I think, from before the play even started by telling Plumlee to help. But in my opinion, in those situations, like in the Blazer game earlier in the year against Philly, where Furkan freaking Korkmaz hits a three to beat us, you switch all picks, even if it's close. I know LeBron just stood there, he didn't even pick, but the fact that AD curled, that's close enough to where you switch automatically in those situations with 2 seconds left. So Grant should have switched onto AD. Plumlee was there in plenty of time to stop LeBron from diving to the hoop. Now, they could have still made a tough shot. They could have passed over the top and they might have still had a shot at the basket, but I just don't think you give them that open of a shot. You switch all picks in those situations. So I actually blame Grant in that situation more than Mason Plumlee. I know that sounds silly to some people, but if you look at the play, it was clearly in Mason Plumlee's mind that he was supposed to switch onto LeBron in that situation, and he was expecting Grant to then cover AD. And as the shot goes in, you can see Plumlee's face. He was not happy that Grant did not switch on that play. The last question of the week is from Jordan Hutchinson. What do you think of Billy Donovan leaving OKC and now signing as the new head coach of the Bulls? I am not a fan of Billy Donovan as an NBA coach. Obviously, he was a good college coach, but I do not like this hire by the Bulls. I thought it was weird that he left OKC and turned down a contract extension, but he just didn't make enough adjustments for me. He lost in the first round consecutive years with Westbrook and Paul George, and then when you play a team like Portland, we've seen that you can take Damian Lillard out of series sometimes if you focus your entire defensive effort on double teaming him. We didn't even see that in the Portland OKC series. If I was Billy Donovan, I would have double teamed Damian with Paul George and Jeremy Grant, both great defenders. So the fact that he didn't even try that much, if at all, in that series really bugged me, and I don't think he's a good coach, and I think that's going to be the wrong move for the Bulls. Obviously, it's an upgrade over Jim Boylan, who is absolutely brutal as the head coach there, but overall, I don't think it's going to be good for the Bulls moving forward, and in a few years, I think they're going to be looking for a new head coach. That's going to do it for another Monday Mailbag. If you have any non-trade related questions, please leave them in the comments below. All trade suggestions, please leave on the latest Trade Talk Tuesday video. I really appreciate everyone for watching. Thank you so much. As always, peace out. Go Blazers.